You're going to rot in here. The only way you're leaving is in a coffin. My own son's words, sharp and cruel as shards of glass, echoed in my ears as he shoved me roughly into the small rustic cabin. The sickening crunch of my phone shattering on the wooden floor was the last sound I heard before the lock clicked shut from the outside. He destroyed my lifeline to the world, severing my only connection. Now I was utterly alone, trapped without food, without water, abandoned like some discarded animal in a cage. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat threatening to burst free. At 66, after dedicating my entire life to this ungrateful son, I found myself a prisoner in his own making, condemned to die of thirst and starvation while he luxuriated on a lavish cruise with Marlene, his wife, and that viper of a mother-in-law who so skillfully manipulated him. But let me tell you how I arrived at this desolate place. How the woman who once held the heart of a happy family became a captive of her own flesh and blood. My name is Ella. For 40 years I believed I'd built a strong family, a foundation built on love and the unwavering strength of sacrifice. I'd worked since I was 18, a seamstress in a small textile factory downtown. My hands, rough and callous from years of sewing and embroidery, held our family together after my husband abandoned us when our son Henry was just 8 years old. From that moment forward, Henry became my reason for being, the driving force that propelled me out of bed before sunrise each morning to get to work on time. I recall vividly the day I resolved to do absolutely anything to give my son the life he deserved. It was a rainy Tuesday in October, and Henry came home in tears because the other children mocked his worn-out sneakers. That night, while he slept, I counted every dollar I'd painstakingly saved for months' money I had intended to use for a new dress, and immediately used it to buy him the finest sneakers the store had to offer. Witnessing his smile the next day was worth more than any new outfit I could have purchased for myself. That's how the years unfolded. Every extra dollar earned, every hour of overtime endured, every moment of rest sacrificed, all were dedicated to him. When he turned 16, I worked double shifts to buy him the motorcycle he so desperately craved. At 21, I mortgaged my modest home to finance his engineering degree at college. I never complained. I never asked for anything in return. I genuinely believed a mother should give everything for her children, expecting nothing beyond their love and respect. Henry graduated with honors and secured a prestigious position at a prominent construction firm. The pride I felt, swelling in my chest like a bursting balloon, was immeasurable. I beamed with joy whenever I saw him depart each morning, impeccably dressed in his sharp suit, carrying his leather briefcase. My son is a successful professional, I tell my neighbors, a smile emanating from the very depths of my soul. For the initial years after his graduation, our relationship seemed idyllic. He visited frequently, taking me to elegant dinners, showering me with expressions of gratitude for all my sacrifices. However, everything irrevocably altered upon his meeting Marlene. The first time he introduced her to me, a cold dread tightened in my gut. It wasn't merely her chilly, calculating demeanor, but the calculating way she regarded my son, as though he were a valuable asset requiring protection from external influences. Marlene, a striking 32-year-old woman with impeccably styled brunette hair, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes, worked as an administrator at a private clinic. From the outset, she made it abundantly clear that she deemed Henry's family, particularly me, beneath her social standing. During their early months of courtship, I attempted to foster a connection with her. I prepared her favorite dishes whenever they visited. I purchased her small gifts using my meager savings. I even mastered the art of preparing sophisticated meals that I knew she favored. Yet, every gesture of affection was met with a disingenuous smile and barbed comments that my son either failed to notice or worse, chose to disregard. "Ella, don't go to so much trouble," Marlene would say in that saccharine voice that grated on my nerves. "We don't need you to do all this. We're not children anymore." But I saw the disdain in her eyes, the contempt for the older woman who had nurtured the man she now considered her possession. Their wedding took place 2 years later in an opulent hall that cost over $20,000. I, who had dreamt for years of my son's wedding day, Felt like an outsider in my own family. Marlene meticulously orchestrated every detail without consulting me, from the guest list to the floral arrangements. When I gently suggested incorporating some cherished family traditions, she looked at me as though I'd uttered utter nonsense. "Ella dear," she said with that condescending tone I'd come to recognize, "this is a modern celebration. I don't think our guests would appreciate those old-fashioned customs." Henry, who once defended me against any slight, simply nodded and steered the conversation elsewhere. On the wedding day, I sat in the front row, wearing a green dress purchased at a discount store, feeling small and insignificant as I watched my son pledge his life to a woman who had already begun to estrange him from me. During the ceremony, as the officiant emphasized the importance of family and respect for parents, I saw Marlene squeeze Henry's hand with a smile that sent a chill down my spine. That evening, while clearing the dishes from the small dinner I'd hosted for close relatives, I overheard a conversation between Marlene and her mother in the backyard. "Now that we're married, we need to establish clear boundaries," Marlene stated in a tone she'd never used in my presence. "Henry is too lenient with his mother. She believes she can still control his life, but those days are over." "You're right, honey," her mother replied with a cruel laugh. "Men need their wives to open their eyes to these things. A meddlesome mother-in-law can ruin a marriage before it even begins." I froze behind the window, each word striking me like a physical blow. The woman I'd strived so hard to please, whom I tried to love as a daughter, was already plotting my exclusion from my son's life. I finished cleaning the kitchen in suffocating silence, heavy with betrayal and dread, tears streaming down my face, questioning whether Henry was aware of his wife's true feelings towards me, or if he'd simply chosen to ignore them to maintain peace in his marriage. That night, for the first time in years, I drifted off to sleep with a profound emptiness in my chest, an ache I didn't know how to alleviate. The ensuing months confirmed my deepest fears. Henry's visits became increasingly sporadic, and when he did come, it was always with Marlene, for shorter and shorter periods. The once effortless flow of conversation between us became strained and superficial, constantly punctuated by subtle yet hurtful comments from his wife. "Henry, don't forget we have dinner with my parents," Marlene would interject whenever it seemed my son was genuinely enjoying our time together. Or worse, "Honey, your mother looks tired. Perhaps we should leave so she can rest." As if I were a frail, doddering old woman requiring constant care, rather than a vibrant woman simply yearning to spend time with her son. But the most profound wound was witnessing Henry's transformation. The loving, considerate son I'd raised was evolving into a distant stranger, someone seemingly ashamed of his humble beginnings, and the mother who had sacrificed everything for him. The first time Henry spoke to me with open contempt was on a Sunday afternoon, 3 months after his wedding. I'd prepared his favorite lunch, the same chicken stew he'd adored since childhood, and eagerly awaited his weekly visit. When he arrived, he was alone, filling me with a flicker of hope that we could finally have some quality time as mother and son. But something in his eyes had fundamentally shifted. He was no longer the affectionate young man who embraced me upon arrival, but a stranger who greeted me with a cold kiss on the cheek and sat at the table as if fulfilling a tedious obligation. "Mom, we need to talk," he said as I served the steaming stew onto his favorite plate, the same ceramic dish adorned with red flowers that I'd purchased to celebrate his 16th birthday. "Marlene and I have been discussing things and we believe it would be better if we started to have more space." His words hit me like a physical shock. "Space? What does that mean, my son?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to maintain composure. "It means that constant visits are impacting our marriage," he replied without meeting my gaze, intently stirring the stew as if it were the most crucial task in the world. "Marlene feels we lack intimacy as a couple because I'm always here." I sat across from him, my legs shaking. "Henry, you only come once a week. How can that possibly affect your marriage? I simply want to see you, to spend time with you. You're all I have." "Exactly. That's the problem," he exploded, slamming his spoon down on the table with a jarring clatter that sent the salt shaker jumping. "I'm all you have. Don't you realize how suffocating that is? I'm 30 years old, Mom. I can't continue to be responsible for your happiness. His words felt like daggers piercing my heart. The son I'd tirelessly worked for, the one I'd foregone any chance of rebuilding my life for after his father abandoned us, was now declaring me a burden on his existence. I never asked you to be responsible for my happiness, I replied, my voice breaking. I merely asked you to love me as I have loved you. Is that too much to ask? Love shouldn't be a prison, he countered, repeating words that clearly weren't his own but Marlene's. You need to understand that I now have a new family, new priorities. I can't continue living to please you. That afternoon, Henry left without finishing the lunch I'd prepared with so much love. I remained alone in my small kitchen, watching the untouched plate of food grow cold, feeling as though something within me had irrevocably shattered. For the first time in my life, I questioned whether sacrificing so much for someone who now saw me as an annoyance had been worthwhile. The following weeks were a silent ordeal. Henry followed through on his threat to limit his visits. What had once been a sacred weekly appointment became sporadic appearances every 2 or 3 weeks, always accompanied by Marlene, and always in a hurry to depart. During these visits, she dominated every conversation, interrupting any moments of intimacy between my son and me with incessant chatter about their plans, their travels, and their new high society acquaintances. Henry and I are considering purchasing a larger house, Marlene announced during one such visit, sipping the coffee I'd specially brewed using imported beans that had cost me $30. Something outside of town, in one of those gated communities with better security and a better class of people. The way she emphasized better class of people, while looking directly at me, made it painfully clear that I didn't belong in that category. Henry, who would have once defended his mother from any implicit insult, simply nodded and continued eating the chocolate cake I'd baked with him in mind. What about this house, then? I asked, referring to my home, the place where I'd raised my son, where all our shared memories resided. Well, it's yours, Mom, Henry replied indifferently. You can do whatever you want with it. We won't be needing it anymore. Those words felt like a slap to the face. The house he'd considered home for 30 years was now merely a possession to be discarded. An uncomfortable reminder of his humble past that clashed with his new upper-middle-class lifestyle. But the worst was yet to come. Just when I thought my relationship with my son had reached its nadir, Marlene received a promotion at the clinic. To celebrate, they hosted a dinner party at their new house, that modern mansion in the exclusive gated community they so frequently boasted about. I wasn't invited. I learned this by chance when I called Henry to ask if he could accompany me to the doctor. A test had revealed an irregularity, and I was terrified. I can't, Mom, he said in a cold voice I barely recognized. Marlene has an important dinner with colleagues. It's crucial for her career. But you can't come with me before the dinner, I insisted, desperation creeping into my voice. It would only be an hour at the office. I'm afraid to go alone. Mom, I need to help Marlene get everything ready. Can't you ask one of your friends to go with you? What friends? For so many years I'd been so consumed by him, his education, his well-being, that I'd neglected my own social connections. Most women my age were busy with grandchildren, husbands, lives they built in a more balanced way than I had. I hung up the phone and sat in my living room for hours, staring at the photographs of Henry that adorned the walls. There he was at 5 years old in his first school uniform, which I'd meticulously washed and ironed every day. There he was at 12, beaming with pride after winning a math competition, the same competition for which I'd paid for extra tutoring by working weekends. There he was at 18, graduating from high school with honors, the day I'd believed all my sacrifices had been worthwhile. The next day I went to the doctor alone. The results were benign, thankfully. But the experience of sitting in that waiting room, completely alone, surrounded by other women accompanied by their sons or husbands, made me feel the deepest loneliness of my life. When I called Henry to share the good news, his response was a curt, "That's good, Mom," before he abruptly changed the subject to recount the success of Marlene's dinner party and how they'd impressed all the important guests. It was then that I truly understood I had lost my son forever. He hadn't died, but the loving, grateful man I'd raised no longer existed. In his place stood an ambitious stranger, ashamed of his roots, who'd chosen a woman who systematically pushed him away from the mother who had given everything for him. The months passed, and the visits became even more infrequent. Henry only appeared when he needed something. For me to hold on to an important document, to prepare a specific dish to impress Marlene's superiors, or to borrow money for some unexpected expense dictated by their lavish lifestyle. "Mom, could you lend me $5,000? He asked during one of his rare visits. "It's for a down payment on a new car. Marlene's broke down, and she needs something a bit more elegant for her job." $5,000 represented nearly all my savings, the money I'd accumulated penny by penny over years for potential medical emergencies or major home repairs. But as always, I couldn't refuse my son anything. "Of course, my son," I replied, feeling my heart constrict. "When do you need it?" "Tomorrow would be perfect," he said with a smile that, for a fleeting moment, reminded me of the sweet boy he once was. "I promise I'll pay you back in 3 months. That promise was never kept. Every time I mentioned the loan, Henry had a new excuse. Unexpected expenses related to the new house, a work trip Marlene needed to take, or car repairs that had cost more than anticipated. The day I reached my breaking point was a gray Tuesday in November, exactly 8 months after the loan remained unpaid. I'd been battling a severe flu for a week, suffering from a high fever and a cough that racked my chest. My 66-year-old body no longer responded as it once had, and for the first time in decades I felt truly vulnerable and terrified. I called Henry, hoping he could either accompany me to the doctor again or at least spend some time with me to ensure I was all right. His response sent a chill down my spine. "I can't go, Mom. Marlene and I have a very important appointment with the architect to remodel the kitchen. It's taken us months to secure an appointment with him. He's the most sought-after architect in the city." "Henry, please," I pleaded, my voice raspy with fever. "I just need someone to be with me for a few hours. I feel so awful and I'm afraid I'll pass out." "Can't you call a neighbor or something?" he replied with an irritation that sliced through me like a knife. "Marlene says that independent adults need to know how to take care of themselves without constantly depending on others." Marlene says. Those 2 words had become the most painful phrase in my vocabulary. Everything my son thought, decided, or felt now passed through the filter of that woman who had managed to transform my loving boy into a cruel stranger. "I'm your mother, Henry," I said, tears mixing with my fever. "Since when am I a stranger to you?" "Oh, Mom, don't be so dramatic. It's just the flu. Have some tea and rest. You'll feel better soon." He hung up without even a goodbye. I remained on the phone for several minutes, feeling something inside me die for good. The son for whom I'd sacrificed my youth, my money, my dreams, my chances at love, had reduced me to an inconvenience that interfered with his important appointments. That night, as I lay in bed shivering with fever and feeling more alone than ever, I made a decision that would forever alter everything. I couldn't continue being the pleading mother, the woman who begged for scraps of attention and affection from a son who clearly despised me. I had to find a way to reclaim my dignity, even if it meant losing my relationship with Henry permanently. My recovery from the flu took 2 full weeks. During that entire time, my phone remained silent. Henry never once called to inquire about my well-being, to ask if I needed anything or even if I was still alive. It was my neighbor Anne, a 70-year-old widow who lived next door, who cared for me. She brought me medicine, prepared warm soups, and sat by my side during the most difficult nights. Ella, and told me one afternoon while helping me change the sweat-soaked sheets, "It's not normal for a son to abandon his sick mother like this. Something is very wrong here." She was right, but admitting it meant confronting a truth I'd been avoiding for months. My son had become a heartless person, and I'd been complicit in that transformation by allowing him to treat me increasingly poorly without establishing any boundaries. When I finally recovered, I decided it was time to take action. If Henry wanted to treat me like a stranger, then so be it. I would no longer be the suffocating mother he described. I would no longer be available at his beck and call. I would no longer be his personal ATM or emergency chef. The first test came 2 weeks later when Henry called me as if nothing had transpired. "Mom, could you make that lasagna Marlene loves so much? Her parents are coming for dinner, and she wants to impress them with some homemade food." For the first time in 30 years I said no. "I'm sorry, Henry, but I can't. I have other plans." The silence on the other end of the line was so protracted, I thought the call had been disconnected. "Other plans?" he repeated in a tone of disbelief that would have been comical if it weren't so pathetic. "What kind of plans could you possibly have?" "My own," I replied with a firmness that surprised even me. "I'm no longer available whenever you need me, especially after you didn't care whether I lived or died during my illness." "What are you talking about? It was just the flu." "A flu that could have killed me, and you didn't even call to see how I was," I countered. "Marlene said it was best to give you space so you could recover and not feel pressured." He lied shamelessly. "Marlene says, Marlene thinks, Marlene believes." I finally exploded. "When are you going to start thinking for yourself, Henry? When are you going to remember that you have a mother who loves you?" "Don't start with your drama," he yelled back. "If you don't want to help me with a simple meal, fine. But don't try to emotionally blackmail me." He hung up abruptly, leaving me trembling. But for the first time in months I felt something akin to relief. The following days were unsettling. On the one hand, I felt guilty for denying my son something, but on the other I was experiencing a sense of freedom I hadn't felt in years. I didn't have to wait by the phone for his sporadic calls. I didn't have to emotionally brace myself for his cold and calculating visits. For the first time in a long time, my house was truly my own. I took advantage of this newfound freedom to reconnect with, and some other neighbors I'd neglected during the years of obsessing over Henry. I began taking afternoon walks, tending to my small garden, and reading the books I'd accumulated but never had time to enjoy. Slowly, very slowly, I began to remember who I was before I became solely Henry's mother. But my son wasn't ready to accept this new version of me. 3 weeks after our contentious phone conversation, he appeared at my door unannounced, accompanied by Marlene and with a look of fury I hadn't seen since his adolescence. "We need to talk," he said, entering my living room without waiting for an invitation. Marlene followed, wearing a designer purple outfit that likely cost more than my monthly salary from the factory. "Of course, make yourselves comfortable," I said sarcastically, but I resolved to remain calm. "How can I help you?" "You can start by explaining what's been going on with you lately," Henry said, sitting in the armchair where he used to curl up as a child so I could read him bedtime stories. "First you hang up on me, then you refuse to help with a simple meal. And now the neighbors are saying, you're trash-talking us, you know." "Talking trash about me?" I asked, genuinely confused. What exactly did I supposedly say? And told her sister. And her sister, in turn, relayed the gossip to a woman at the grocery store. That I had said Henry was an ungrateful son who abandoned his sick mother. Marlene chimed in, deploying that voice that feigned concern while dripping with venom. "Do you realize the damage that can do to Henry's reputation at work?" My mouth dropped open. It was true that I'd expressed my disappointment with Henry to Anne, but I never imagined my words would spread so far, or that my son would be more concerned with his reputation than with understanding my feelings. "Your reputation?" I asked Henry directly, completely ignoring Marlene. "That's your biggest concern, isn't it? Not the fact that your mother felt abandoned when she needed you most?" "Oh, please," Marlene interjected before Henry could respond. "Ella, you're 66 years old. It's time you grew up and stopped acting like a spoiled teenager looking for attention." The ensuing silence was deafening. I looked at my son, expecting him to defend the woman who had raised him. I expected him to tell his wife she had no right to disrespect me in my own home, to remember all the sacrifices I'd made for him. But Henry remained silent, staring at his shoes like a scolded child. Henry's silence was more agonizing than any insult Marlene could have hurled at me. In that moment, watching my 30-year-old son cower while his wife attacked me in my own home, I understood that I had irrevocably lost the boy I had raised with so much love. I see you have nothing to say, I said directly to Henry, feeling rage begin to replace the sadness I'd carried for months. I see you're going to let me be disrespected in my own house without lifting a finger to defend me. He finally looked up, but his eyes revealed no guilt or remorse, only irritation. Mom, Marlene isn't disrespecting you. She's just telling you the truth you need to hear. You can't keep living as if you're the victim of everything. The victim? I stood up, feeling years of pent-up frustration boil in my veins. I'm the victim for expecting a minimum of respect from my own son, for wanting you to care if I was dead or alive when I had a 104-degree fever. It was just the flu, he yelled, also standing. You couldn't expect me to cancel my whole life for a simple flu. It wasn't a simple flu. It was your sick and scared mother asking her only son to go with her to the doctor. I yelled back, tears of rage streaming down my cheeks. It was the woman who worked double shifts to pay for your college, who mortgaged her house to give you a career, who gave up every chance at happiness so you could have everything you wanted. No one asked you to do that. His response hit me like a physical blow. No one asked you to sacrifice your life for me. Those were your decisions. For a moment the world seemed to stand still. My own son, the man I'd given everything to, was telling me my sacrifices had been not only unnecessary but unwelcome. That everything I'd done out of love had been a colossal mistake he now resented. You're right, I said, my voice unfamiliar, cold and calm despite the tempest raging within. No one asked me to sacrifice my life for you. They were my decisions, stupid decisions, made by a woman who believed a mother's love meant giving everything without expecting anything in return. Marlene smiled with evident satisfaction, clearly enjoying the spectacle of my destruction at the hands of my own son's words. I'm glad you finally get it, Henry continued, emboldened by what he perceived as my surrender. Now maybe you can start living your own life instead of trying to control mine. Oh, I'm going to live my own life, I assured him, feeling an odd calm settle over me. In fact, I'm going to start right now. I walked to the small table where I kept important documents and retrieved the paper I'd been avoiding for months. The will I'd written years ago, naming Henry the sole beneficiary of everything I owned. You know what, son? I said, holding the document before him. You're right. My sacrifices were my decisions. Decisions I now deeply regret making. But this house, these savings, this inheritance you were going to receive, these are also my decisions. Henry's eyes fixed on the paper, his expression unreadable. What are you doing? I'm making a new decision, I replied, walking toward the paper shredder I'd recently purchased. I'm deciding that I no longer want a son who despises me to inherit anything from the stupid woman who sacrificed everything for him. Mom, wait, he yelled, lunging toward me as I fed the will into the machine. But it was too late. The document disintegrated into thin strips, falling into the bin like confetti celebrating my liberation. What did you just do? Marlene asked, her voice suddenly high-pitched, revealing her genuine concern. Until that moment, she'd been the cruel wife enjoying the family drama. Now she realized she'd just lost a considerable inheritance. I just did what my son asked, I replied, a smile welling up from deep within. I just stopped making decisions based on a love that is clearly unrequited. Henry was pale, staring at the shredded remains of the will as if he couldn't believe what he'd just witnessed. Mom, you can't do that. This house, your savings. I'm your only son. Exactly, I said, feeling a strength I never knew I possessed. You're my only son. And you just told me that all my sacrifices for you were mistakes that no one asked for. So now I'm going to correct those mistakes. Are you insane? Marlene shrieked, completely losing her composure. You can't disinherit your own son just because you had an argument. An argument? I looked at her with a calmness that surprised even me. Marlene, dear, this isn't an argument. This is the result of months of humiliation, contempt, and abandonment. And this is what happens when you treat someone like trash for so long that they finally decide they deserve something better. Mom, please, Henry pleaded, reaching for me as if I were a wild animal needing calming. You're acting impulsively. You're angry and not thinking clearly. On the contrary, I replied, stepping away from him. For the first time in years, I'm thinking with perfect clarity. I'm realizing that raising an ungrateful son was my biggest mistake, but it doesn't have to be my permanent one. You can't talk to your mother like that. Marlene yelled at Henry, but no longer from a place of moral superiority, only from the panic of seeing a fortune disappear before her eyes. Tell her something. Fix this. The irony was exquisite. The same woman who had spent years poisoning my son against me, who had encouraged his cruelty, was now demanding he treat me well because her financial future was at stake. Look how interesting, I said, observing the growing desperation on both their faces. For months, Marlene, you've been telling my son that I was a toxic, controlling mother who needed to learn to be alone. And now that I'm finally following your advice, you realize that maybe it wasn't such a good idea after all. Ella, I never said those things, she lied shamelessly. But her trembling voice betrayed her. Of course you did. And my son, instead of defending himself or his mother, chose to believe every one of your poisonous words. He chose to treat me like a nuisance instead of the woman who gave him life and paid for the education he now uses to earn the money you both love to spend. Henry sank back into the armchair, head in his hands. For a moment, just a moment, I saw a flicker of the vulnerable boy he once was, and my heart almost broke. Almost, he mumbled. Mom, I know I've been difficult lately. I know I might not have been the son you expected, but you can't punish me like this. We're family. Family. I repeated the word as if hearing it for the first time. Do you know what that word means, Henry? It means being there when the other person needs you. It means mutual respect. It means not allowing anyone, not even your wife, to humiliate the person who gave you life. I can change, he mumbled, but his words sounded hollow even to him. No, I responded with a firmness that surprised him. I'm no longer interested in whether you can change. I'm no longer interested in being the mother who begs for scraps of affection from a son who clearly despises me. I've decided I deserve better than that. But we're your only family, Marlene shrieked, resorting to the emotional blackmail she'd so often criticized me for using. I smiled at her, a sweetness brutally contrasting with my words. You were my family. Now you are two strangers who came to my house to disrespect me and demand an inheritance you're no longer going to receive. You can't do this, Marlene screamed, completely abandoning her mask of sophistication. That house is worth more than $150,000. Your savings are our future. I heard her speak of our future as if my money, earned through 40 years of sewing, was something that belonged to them by divine right. The woman who had treated me like an ignorant peasant for years was now claiming my inheritance with the desperation of someone who'd just seen their life plan vanish. Interesting, I said, crossing my arms. So now my savings are your future. The same woman who told me I was a dramatic old woman who needed to grow up is now here demanding that dramatic old woman's money. Henry stood abruptly, his face displaying an expression I'd never seen before. A mixture of panic, rage, and something that looked dangerously like a threat. Mom, you're going to reverse this right now, he said in a low, controlled voice reminiscent of his father at his worst. You're going to call your lawyer. And you're going to make a new will where I'm your only heir. Or what? I asked, feeling a strange calm in the face of his threatening demeanor. What are you going to do if I don't, Henry? Or you're going to find out what it really means to be alone, he replied, approaching me with slow, deliberate steps. Do you think anyone is going to take care of you when you're a frail old woman? Do you think you'll be able to keep this house when you're 80 and can't even walk? His words were like daggers, but they no longer hurt me as they once had. The woman who had endured months of humiliation had died in the last 20 minutes. In her place, someone stronger had been born. Someone who finally understood her own worth. I'd rather die alone in a nursing home than continue living as the emotional slave of a son who despises me. I responded with a serenity that baffled him. I'd rather strangers take my money than give it to someone who treats me like garbage. You're insane, Marlene screamed again. Completely insane. Henry, do something. Your mother has lost her mind. I haven't lost my mind, I replied, walking toward the front door. I found it, and now I'm kindly asking you to leave my house. We're not leaving until you fix this insanity, Henry declared, planting himself in the middle of the living room as if he owned the place. Then I'll have to call the police to explain the concept of trespassing, I replied, heading for the phone. Don't you dare, he yelled, snatching the receiver from my hand with a violence that scared me. For the first time in this confrontation, I felt a flicker of real fear. The man standing before me was no longer my son. He was a desperate stranger, capable of anything to protect what he considered his. And in that moment I knew I was in real danger. Give me back that phone, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Not until you come to your senses, he replied, holding the device out of my reach. You're going to sit down. You're going to calm down and we're going to talk about this like civilized adults. Civilized adults? I laughed, feeling a hysteria bordering on madness. You're going to teach me about being civilized? You, the man who just snatched the phone from his 66-year-old mother? It's for your own good, he yelled. And in that moment I saw Marlene's influence on him completely. Those were words she had used with me many times, always justifying her cruelties as acts of tough love. My own good, I repeated, feeling the last fiber of maternal love break for good in my chest. For 30 years, everything you've done against me has been for my own good. Marrying a woman who hates me was for my own good. Abandoning me when I was sick was for my own good. Humiliating me in my own home is for my own good. Marlene approached us with that fake smile I knew so well. Ella, I know you're hurt, but you have to understand that Henry only wants what's best for you. We all want what's best for you. All of us. I looked at her with an incredulity that was almost comical. You want what's best for me? You, the woman who spent 2 years poisoning my son against me, the woman who told me I was a dramatic old lady who needed to grow up? That was just frustration in the moment, she lied pitifully. You know, we appreciate you very much. You appreciate me? I repeated her words as if they were a particularly funny joke. You appreciate me so much that my son didn't speak to me for 2 weeks when I was sick. You appreciate me so much that you come to my house to demand I reverse a decision I made about my own money. Henry moved closer, still holding the phone out of my reach. Mom, listen to me. You are going to make a new will. You are going to leave me this house and your savings, and we are going to forget this ridiculous conversation. Or what? I asked again, but this time with a smile that visibly disturbed him. Or you're going to find out what it means to be completely alone, he threatened. Without a son, without money, without anyone who cares about you. Henry, I said, moving toward him until our faces were inches apart. I'm already completely alone. I've already found out what it's like to have a son who doesn't care about me. The difference is that now I finally decided to do something about it. Something in my tone must have alarmed him because, for the first time since the confrontation began, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. What do you mean by that? I mean, you two are going to leave my house right now and you are never coming back. I mean, I'm going to change the locks tomorrow. I mean, I'm going to make a new will where all my money goes to charities that help single mothers so no other woman makes the mistake of sacrificing everything for an ungrateful son. You can't do that. They both yelled in unison, a chorus of greed and desperation. I can and I will, I assured them. And if you ever bother me again, I'm going to call the police and I'm going to tell them exactly what kind of people you are. I'm going to tell them how you treated an old woman, how you threatened her in her own home, how you snatched her phone when she tried to call for help. Henry stared at me for a long moment, and for an instant I thought he might finally react like the son I'd raised. I thought he would give me back the phone, apologize, remember who I was to him. Instead, he threw the phone against the wall with such force that it shattered, filling my living room with broken plastic and crushed wires. There's your phone, he said with a cruel smile that chilled my blood. Let's see how you call the police now. The silence that followed was absolute. The three of us stood staring at the remnants of the phone scattered on the floor. A perfect metaphor for what was left of our family relationship. Henry, I said in a voice that sounded strangely calm even to myself, You just crossed a line that you can't come back from. Is that so? He challenged, puffing out his chest like a street bully. And what are you going to do about it, Mom? You don't have a phone anymore. You don't have anyone to help you. You're completely at our mercy. Marlene smiled with satisfaction, clearly enjoying the spectacle of seeing me finally subdued and humiliated, as she had planned for so long. What neither of them knew was that they had just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I kept staring at the phone fragments for several seconds, feeling something fundamental shift within me. It was no longer fear, sadness, or even rage. It was something far more dangerous. An absolute calm, the serenity of someone who has finally seen the true nature of the people in front of them. You know what, Henry? I said, bending down to pick up one of the largest pieces of the destroyed phone. You're right. I don't have a phone anymore. I don't have anyone to help me. I am completely at your mercy. His smile widened, interpreting my words as surrender. I'm glad you finally understand the situation. Oh, I understand it perfectly, I continued, holding the broken plastic fragment as if it were a precious relic. I understand that my own son just destroyed my only way of communicating with the outside world. I understand that he is threatening me in my own home. I understand that his wife is here enjoying every second of my humiliation. Marlene came closer with that expression of triumph she'd so long waited to show me. Now maybe you can be reasonable, Ella. Making that new will is the only intelligent thing you can do in this situation. You're right, I replied, dropping the piece of phone. That's exactly what I'm going to do. They exchanged a look of absolute satisfaction, believing they had finally broken me. They had no idea that what had just broken wasn't my will, but the last chains that tied me to them out of love. Perfect, Henry said, relaxing his shoulders. I knew you would come to your senses. We'll go to the lawyer tomorrow morning and get all this settled. Tomorrow, I repeated, nodding slowly. Of course tomorrow. And in the meantime, Marlene added with that poisonous smile, you should reflect on how you've been behaving lately. A little humility would do you good. Humility? I murmured. Yes, I definitely need more humility. Henry headed for the door, clearly satisfied with the outcome of his intimidation. We're leaving now, but we'll come for you first thing in the morning, and you'd better be ready to cooperate. Of course, I assured them, following them to the exit. I'll be completely ready. Marlene stopped at the threshold and looked at me with the condescension she'd perfected. Ella, I know this has been hard for you, but one day you'll thank us for opening your eyes. Sometimes tough love is the only thing that works. Tough love, I repeated her words. Yes, I definitely need to learn more about tough love. They left without saying goodbye, leaving me alone in my house with the remains of my phone and something much more important. Absolute clarity about who the people who had just walked out my door really were. I waited until I heard the sound of their car driving away before I moved. Then, with a calm that surprised me, I went to my bedroom and pulled out the cell phone I had secretly bought 3 months earlier from under the mattress. After realizing I needed a way to communicate that Henry didn't know about, I dialed In's number. And it's Ella. Could you come over? I need your help with something urgent. 20 minutes later, Anne was sitting in my living room staring at the remnants of the phone with an expression of absolute horror. Ella, this is very serious. Your own son threatened you and destroyed your phone. We have to call the police. No, I said, serving her a cup of tea with perfectly steady hands. Not yet. What do you mean not yet? This is domestic violence. It's intimidation. You can't let them treat you like this. I won't let them, I assured her. But I'm going to handle it my way. And studied me with her wise eyes, trying to understand what I was thinking. What do you have in mind? They think they've broken me, I explained, feeling a strange smile form on my lips. They think tomorrow I'm going to go like an obedient sheep and make a new will where I leave them all my money. And you're not going to? Oh yes, I am, I said, my smile widening. But it won't be the will they expect. I explained my plan to Anne, who at first tried to dissuade me, insisting it was too risky. But when I told her all the details of how they had treated me over the past few months, When she saw the remains of the phone and truly understood what had happened that afternoon, her expression completely changed. "Are you sure you want to do this?" she finally asked me. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I replied. "For 30 years I've allowed myself to be treated badly out of fear of losing my son's love. But today I realize that love was lost a long time ago. What's left isn't love. It's habit, convenience, and greed." And nodded slowly. "What do you need me to do?" "I need you to be my witness," I said. "I need you to see exactly how they behave toward me so that when all this is over, you can testify about what really happened." That night I couldn't sleep. But it wasn't because of fear or anxiety. It was because of the strange sense of freedom I was experiencing. For the first time in decades I was taking total control of my life. I was going to demonstrate to Henry and Marlene that they had seriously underestimated me, the woman they believed they had completely controlled. At 6 a.m., I contacted the lawyer who had originally drafted my will. I explained the need for urgent revisions and requested he come to my house that morning, before Henry and Marlene arrived. "Are you certain about these changes, Miss Ella?" the lawyer inquired after reviewing my new instructions. "They're quite drastic." "Completely sure," I affirmed, signing each page with a resolve I hadn't felt in years. "And I want it unequivocally clear that I am making these decisions with full mental capacity and without coercion." "Understood. The documents will be filed immediately at 10 a.m. Precisely as predicted, I heard Henry's car pull up. Anne was concealed in the kitchen within earshot of the living room. My cell phone, discreetly hidden amongst the couch cushions, was recording. I opened the door before they could knock, affecting an expression of perfect resignation. "Good morning," I greeted them, adopting a submissive tone. "I was expecting you." Henry entered with the arrogant swagger of a conqueror, mirroring his demeanor from the previous night. "Perfect. I see a night of reflection did you good." "Yes," I murmured, keeping my gaze downcast. I understood everything perfectly. Marlene eyed me suspiciously, sensing something amiss, but my portrayal of a defeated woman seemed convincing. "Did you call the lawyer?" Henry asked. "He already came," I replied. "The new will is complete." They exchanged a look of utter triumph. They believed they had one. "Excellent," Marlene stated, settling onto my sofa as if she owned the place. "And what exactly does it say?" I presented them with a copy of the document, observing their faces light up as they began to read. Unbeknownst to them, they held a fabricated document, meticulously prepared for this specific moment. "Perfect," Henry murmured, reading about his complete inheritance. "I knew you would come to your senses." "Yes," I replied, feeling the adrenaline surge. "I came to my senses completely. Now that this is settled," Marlene declared, pocketing the fake will like a trophy, "we need to discuss some other practical matters." "What kind of matters?" I asked, flawlessly maintaining my act. "Well," Henry interjected, making himself comfortable as if he were the new homeowner, "now that we know this property will eventually be ours, Marlene and I have been considering that perhaps it would be best if you moved to a more age-appropriate location." "Age-appropriate?" I repeated, the rage simmering beneath my calm exterior. "Yes, Mom," Henry said. "A place where you can receive the care you need. A senior living facility? Perhaps somewhere with 24/7 medical staff?" Marlene nodded enthusiastically. "We've been researching some excellent options, places where you can socialize with your peers, where you won't have to worry about maintaining this large house." "I see," I murmured, clenching my fists behind my back. "And when would this transition need to occur?" "Well," Henry said, exchanging another knowing glance with his wife, "we were thinking the sooner the better. This house requires significant renovations if we're going to sell it for its true value." "Sell it?" I asked, feigning confusion. "But I thought you wanted it for yourselves." "Oh no," Marlene responded with a laugh that grated on my nerves. "This house is too old, too small for our needs, but the lot is excellent, very well located. With the right renovations, or even better, by demolishing it and building something modern, we could get almost $400,000. There it was, the brutal, unvarnished truth. They not only intended to evict me from my home, but also to erase every trace of my life there, every memory of raising my son within those walls. $400,000, I repeated slowly. That's a considerable sum. Exactly, Henry confirmed. And with your savings, which according to the will, amount to $50,000, we'd be talking about over $500,000. It's enough for Marlene and me to buy the house of our dreams in the city's finest neighborhood. The house of your dreams, I whispered, each word a stinging blow. And where do I fit into these dreams? You'll be perfectly cared for at the facility, Marlene assured me with practiced condescension. You'll have everything you need: food, shelter, medical attention. What more could a woman your age ask for? She added. What more could I ask for? Perhaps respect, gratitude, perhaps for the son I sacrificed my life for, not to be treated like discarded furniture. And when would all this be ready? I inquired, maintaining my composure. Actually, Henry said, seeking his wife's permission, we've already made some calls. There's a very good facility on the outskirts of town with immediate availability. We could take you tomorrow morning to check it out. Tomorrow? The swiftness of their plan stole my breath. Isn't that rather rushed? Mom, Henry said with the forced patience one uses with difficult children, the longer we wait, the harder it will be for you to adjust. It's best to make the change quickly, like ripping off a Band-Aid. Like ripping off a Band-Aid. That was the metaphor my son had chosen to describe uprooting me from my home, my memories, everything that had been my world for 4 decades. Besides, Marlene added, we've already contacted contractors to appraise the property. One can come next week, but we need the house to be vacant. Vacant? I echoed. Exactly, she confirmed with a smile, making no attempt to conceal her intentions. I remained silent for several minutes, feigning contemplation. In reality, I was savoring every second of this conversation, recording every cruel word, every ruthless plan, every display of greed and contempt hidden beneath their facade of filial concern. You know what? I finally said, rising from the couch with deliberately slow movements. I think you're right. I think it's time I accepted the reality of my situation. They visibly relaxed, interpreting my words as the complete surrender they craved. I'm glad to hear you say that, Henry said, also standing. I know it's difficult, but ultimately you'll be happier this way. Happier? I nodded. Yes, I'll definitely be happier. So, tomorrow we'll visit the facility? Marlene asked, already pulling out her phone to make arrangements. Tomorrow, I confirmed. But first, there's something I need to show you. Something important I found while organizing for the move. What is it? Henry asked with sudden interest. It's in the basement, I explained, heading towards the basement door. It's something that belonged to your grandfather. Something I thought you might appreciate as a family heirloom. Curiosity overcame any caution they might have had. They followed me into the basement, descending the creaking wooden stairs. My basement was a place Henry had avoided for years. As a child, he had an irrational fear of enclosed, dark spaces, and as an adult, he simply chose not to go there. What he didn't know was that I had transformed that space into my private sanctuary, a repository of my most cherished memories and other items I'd been collecting for years. It's a bit dark, I told them, switching on the stairwell light but leaving the rest of the basement in shadow. Be careful where you step. We reached the bottom of the stairs and I flipped on the main light. The basement was illuminated, revealing what I had been preparing for months, unbeknownst to them. What is all this? Marlene asked, looking around with a mixture of confusion and alarm. The walls were covered with photographs, documents, and newspaper clippings, but not typical family keepsakes. They were evidence. Photos of the bruises I'd sustained after Henry's outbursts. Copies of bank statements showing his unpaid loans. Recordings of conversations where he and Marlene spoke dismissively of me, believing I couldn't hear them. This is my archive, I explained with a calmness that starkly contrasted with their growing panic. Everything you've done, everything you've said, everything you've planned, it's all here. Henry approached one of the walls, reading some of the documents, his face paling, a sight that brought me immense satisfaction. "Mom, what is this?" "Why?" I finished his question. Why had I documented everything? Because I knew I would eventually need proof of who they truly were. Marlene discovered transcripts of some of their cruelest phone conversations I had secretly recorded over the past few months. "This is illegal," she shrieked, clutching the papers with trembling hands. "You can't record private conversations." "Actually, I can," I informed her. "In my own home, I have the right to record any conversation. And considering I was documenting emotional and financial abuse, any court would deem it entirely justified." The silence in the basement was deafening. Henry and Marlene moved amongst the walls like zombies, reading transcripts of conversations where they planned my future without consulting me, viewing photographs documenting every humiliation, every moment of contempt they'd inflicted upon me. "This right here," I said, pointing to a specific section of the wall, "is every instance you borrowed money from me and never repaid a single cent. In total, you owe me $47,000. Henry approached the documents, his face growing increasingly pale. "Mom, those weren't loans. They were family assistance." "Family assistance?" I laughed bitterly. "Is that what you call theft now? Because right here, I have recordings of you promising to repay every cent." Marlene had found the most incriminating photographs, images of her rifling through my drawers without permission, documents proving she'd investigated my property value without my knowledge, even screenshots of her text messages mocking me with her friends. "How did you get all this?" she asked, her voice trembling with rage. "Your mistake, dear Marlene, was to completely underestimate the resourceful old lady you thought you had domesticated," I replied. "It turns out this old lady learned to use security cameras, recording apps, and many other modern tools during the months you thought I was losing my mind." In the center of the basement, a table held something neither of them had noticed until that moment. An open laptop with an active video call. "What is that?" Henry asked, walking towards the screen. "Oh, that," I said with a heartfelt smile. "That's my life insurance. For the past 20 minutes, everything we've set up here and down here has been live-streamed to several very important people." The screen displayed multiple video windows. A lawyer specializing in elder abuse, a social worker, and, to my immense satisfaction, Mark, my neighbor, an investigative journalist for the local newspaper. "Ella," the lawyer exclaimed from the screen, "are you all right? Do we need to call the police?" "I'm perfectly fine," I replied, never taking my eyes off Henry and Marlene's faces of absolute horror. "In fact, I've never felt better." "Turn that off," Marlene screamed, lunging for the computer. But I was faster, closing it before she could reach it. "Too late," I informed her. "Everything is already recorded and saved in multiple locations. Your plans to put me in a facility, your comments about demolishing my house, your confession about the $400,000 you expect to make from my property, all of it." Henry collapsed into an old chair, his head in his hands. "Mom, what have you done?" "What I should have done months ago," I replied. "Protected myself from you too. You can't use any of this." Marlene screamed, waving the papers. "It's private conversations. It's an invasion of privacy." "Honey," I said with infinite patience, "documenting abuse isn't an invasion of privacy. It's survival." I walked towards another section of the wall where something hung that filled them with even greater terror. Copies of recent legal documents. "These right here are particularly interesting," I continued. "They're the lawsuits I'm filing next week. One for elder financial abuse, another for intimidation and threats, and this last one for property damage for the phone you destroyed yesterday." "Are you crazy?" Henry yelled, standing abruptly. "I'm your son. You can't sue your own son." "My son?" I looked at him with a coldness that made him recoil. "My son died months ago, Henry. The person standing before me is a stranger who threatens me, who destroys my belongings, who plans to steal my inheritance and put me in a home against my will." Tears streamed down my cheeks, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of liberation, of justice, of a satisfaction long awaited. But that's not all, I continued, walking towards the most important document. This one right here is my favorite. I showed them a copy of the Real will, the one I'd signed that morning with the lawyer. Remember the will I showed you upstairs? It was fake. This is the real one. Henry snatched the document, reading it with a desperation that gave me immense pleasure. This can't be, he mumbled, reading line by line. You can't have done this. What does it say? Marlene asked, peering over her husband's shoulder. It says, I informed her with a radiant smile, that all my property and savings will go to a foundation for single mothers fighting to get an education for their children. It says that not a single cent will go to people who treat the elderly like garbage. Marlene went completely pale. You can't do that. We're your family. My family. I laughed until my sides hurt. My family doesn't threaten me. My family doesn't plan to put me in a facility so they can sell my house. My family doesn't destroy my things when they don't get what they want. Mom, please, Henry pleaded, and for the first time in months, I saw a semblance of the son I'd raised. We know we've been difficult with you, but we didn't know you felt this way. You didn't know? I retorted. You didn't know when you hung up on me while I had a fever? You didn't know when you allowed your wife to insult me in my own house? You didn't know when you threatened to leave me completely alone if I didn't do what you wanted? I was just frustrated, he stammered. I didn't mean those things. But you said them and you meant them, I countered. And for months you treated me as if I were a nuisance you had to tolerate until you could finally get rid of me. Marlene began to cry, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of pure rage and frustration at seeing her perfect plan crumble. This isn't over, she shrieked. We're going to contest that will. We're going to prove you aren't of sound mind. Go ahead, I told her, moving closer. Try to prove I'm not of sound mind. Try to explain to a judge why a woman who meticulously documented months of abuse and neglect doesn't have the right to decide what to do with her own money. The silence that followed was absolute. They finally understood they had lost, that their greed and cruelty had been their downfall. Besides, I added, heading towards the stairs, you forgot that all of this is going to be published in the newspaper next week. Mark already has all the material he needs to write a very interesting article about elder abuse in middle-class families. Your names, your photographs, your own words describing your plans for me. You can't do that, Henry yelled, following me. That will ruin my career. You should have thought about that before you threatened your mother, I replied without turning. We reached the main floor, wherein waited with an expression of utter satisfaction. How did it go? She asked, though Henry and Marlene's devastated expressions answered the question. Perfectly, I replied. I think our guests are ready to leave now. Henry and Marlene stood in my living room like statues, grappling with the enormity of what had transpired. All their arrogance had vanished, replaced by a desperation that might have pitted me if I weren't savoring every second of their downfall. Mom, Henry said in a broken voice I hadn't heard since his childhood. There has to be a way to fix this. We're family. We can find a solution. A solution? I looked at him with a calm that contrasted sharply with his panic. The only solution was for you to treat me like a human being. You had that opportunity for months, and you wasted it every single day. Marlene paced in circles, mumbling about lawyers and appeals, unable to accept defeat at the hands of the dramatic old lady they'd so underestimated. Ella, she finally said, attempting to regain composure, I know we've had our differences, but this is too extreme. You're destroying your own family. I didn't destroy anything, I replied. You destroyed this family the day you decided that my love was a burden and my money was your right. I'm just documenting the destruction you've already caused. And came to my side, placing a protective hand on my shoulder. Ella, I think it's time for them to go. The police are on their way to take a formal report about the intimidation and the broken phone. The police. Henry's face went even paler. Mom, please don't do this. My job, my reputation, everything is going to be ruined. Your reputation? I repeated with incredulity. Until the very end, all you care about is your reputation. Not the pain you caused me. Not the years I lost loving you unconditionally. Just your precious reputation. It's not just that, he yelled, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the violent temper he'd displayed the previous day. It's my whole life, my career. Everything I've worked for. Everything you've worked for? I murmured, walking to the window, where I saw the flashing lights of a police cruiser approaching. Are you referring to the career I paid for with my savings? The job you got thanks to the education I financed by working double shifts? The siren grew louder, and Henry and Marlene instinctively headed for the door. Don't go yet, I said with a smile that must have been terrifying. I want you to stay and meet the officers. I want you to personally explain why you thought threatening a 66-year-old woman was a good idea. The police arrived at precisely 3 p.m. Two young officers listened to my story with a seriousness that filled me with satisfaction, and corroborated my account, and my audio recordings were accepted as evidence. Miss Elliott, one officer said after gathering the information, do you wish to press formal charges against your son and his daughter-in-law? I looked at Henry, sitting defeated on my sofa. For a second, just 1 second, I felt a flicker of the maternal love that had defined my life. Then I remembered his words from the day before. No one asked you to sacrifice your life for me. I remembered the cruel smile with which he destroyed my phone. I remembered their plans to place me in a facility without my consent. Yes, I replied firmly. I want to press formal charges. The subsequent legal proceedings were exactly as devastating as I'd anticipated. The local newspapers covered the story extensively, especially after Mark published his investigative article, The Price of Indifference. When children become predators. Henry's company fired him after the scandal reached his superiors. Marlene lost her position at the clinic. But what gave me the most satisfaction wasn't their professional ruin, but something simpler, more personal. 3 months later, Henry appeared at my door, alone and defeated. Mom, he said, can we talk? I studied his haggard face, the deep dark circles under his eyes, the years added to his appearance in just a few weeks. No, I replied simply. Please, he pleaded, tears welling up. I've lost everything. My job, my reputation, my marriage. Marlene left me last week. I have nothing. Now you know how that feels, I said calmly. Now you know what it's like to lose everything because of someone who's supposed to love you. Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about everything. I know I was terrible to you. I know you didn't deserve anything we did, but I'm your son. There has to be some way to fix this. For a moment, I felt the familiar urge to comfort him, to forgive as I had countless times before. But then I remembered something I'd learned during these months of freedom. Forgiveness without consequences isn't love. It's cowardice. Henry, I said, keeping the door slightly ajar. For 30 years, I forgave you for every cruelty, every moment of contempt. Every time you treated me as if I were less important than anything else in your life. I forgave you because I believed that's what loving mothers do. Exactly, he exclaimed, attempting to draw closer. You're my mother. You love me. I loved you. I corrected him, my voice steady. I loved the sweet boy who used to cling to me during his nightmares. I loved the ambitious young man who vowed to one day repay all I'd sacrificed for him. But that boy, that young man, they died a long time ago. The person standing before me is a stranger who prioritized greed over love, cruelty over gratitude. Can I change? He cried out desperately, his voice raw with desperation. Can I become the son you want again? I don't want you to change for me, I said, starting to close the door, my resolve hardening. If you ever change, let it be for yourself, because you recognize the despicable person you've become. But it's no longer my responsibility to fix you. Mom, please, he pleaded, his foot wedging itself in the doorway, preventing me from fully shutting it. You can't abandon me like this. I'm your only son. I didn't hesitate, a firmness surprising even myself. You abandoned me, I stated calmly. I'm simply acknowledging what happened months ago. Gently but firmly, I pushed his foot aside and closed the door. I heard his sobs from the other side, his desperate pleas, his belated promises of change. I remained there for several minutes, listening as the man who had once been my entire world completely unraveled on my porch. A part of me yearned to open the door, to comfort him, to revert to the forgiving mother I once was. But a stronger force within me, the part reborn in that basement filled with irrefutable evidence, the part that had finally learned to value itself, held firm. Eventually, I heard his footsteps fading away, the rumble of a car starting, and then the blessed silence. I went to the kitchen, where Anna waited with a steaming cup of tea and a proud, knowing smile. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. "Free," I replied, accepting the cup with hands that were, at last, steady. "For the first time in 30 years I feel completely free." That night, as I prepared for bed in my house, a house no one would ever take from me again, I reflected on the events of the day. I had lost my only son, but I had gained something infinitely more precious, my dignity. At 66, I had finally grasped that self-love isn't selfish, it's survival. I had learned that setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's a fundamental necessity. I had learned that sometimes, severing the ties that poison your soul is the only way to save what remains. I had given everything for a son who treated me like a walking ATM. But now, at long last, I was going to give everything to the only person who truly deserved it, myself. And for the first time in decades, that prospect didn't fill me with fear. It filled me with exhilaration.